So, Invincible Season 4 just wrapped up. As someone who loved the original source material, it's always really fun to revisit this story and see how the show evolves to make changes and coexist with the comic. And while it's not perfect, above all else, I love how this creator-owned comic from the early 2000s is getting this massive spotlight and has turned into a cultural icon. Back when Season 2 ended, I made a video talking about my favorite indie comics that I think deserved the same treatment, to be adapted into these big animated projects and get more people into these incredible stories. But there are so many amazing creatives making fantastic comics that I couldn't just stop there, so these are some more comics that deserve the Invincible treatment. Invincible really has made such a name for itself in such a short amount of time, and its fan base is even more impressive. Let's see how they're doing right now, actually. Oh,
protein tubes with
I don't even want to know what's going on.
It's
This video is sponsored by CyberGhost VPN. Listen, most of us are online way too much. I know this because I'm online way too much, but the internet is a messed up place filled with shady sites and trackers and people watching everything you do, and even incognito mode doesn't prevent that. Your internet service provider, your school, or your work's IT department, even your Wi-Fi router, they can all track what you do online, which they then turn into data to sell, leading to targeted ads and even scammers. Specifically nowadays, a VPN is basically necessary if you want any kind of privacy or online safety. CyberGhost VPN reroutes your traffic through a secure tunnel, keeping your IP hidden and your data private. Just turn it on before you browse and choose from encrypted servers in over 100 countries. CyberGhost VPN also unlocks geo-restricted games and content from a lot of streaming platforms, and you can sometimes even get better deals shopping online by simply changing your virtual location. It works on all major devices and operating systems like Windows, macOS, Android, iOS, and even smart TVs. And you can protect up to 7 devices at the same time. And with over 38 million users worldwide and over 20,000 positive reviews on Trustpilot, CyberGhost VPN is one of the highest recommended VPNs on the market. Click the link down below to get CyberGhost VPN for just $2.03 a month plus 4 months for free, which is 84% off. They even have a 45-day money-back guarantee, so you have nothing to lose. Thanks to CyberGhost VPN for sponsoring this video, and thanks to my patrons and channel members who help make these videos possible starting at just $1 a month. When I say the Invincible treatment, I don't necessarily mean do the exact same thing as Invincible but with a different comic. Robert Kirkman, Cory Walker, and Ryan Ottley are very smart here. They're taking a story that's already very good, and now with the power of hindsight, they're able to rework it just enough and elevate it above the level of your average direct adaptation. But at the same time, it's not perfect. The animation quality is seriously lacking compared to other animated shows or even just the first season. Despite all that Amazon money, there's only 4 compositors for the whole show, which makes everything feel flat and unfinished. But in spite of those issues, I still think that what Invincible has accomplished is really special. In just a few years, Invincible went from a niche indie comic to a complete global phenomenon. The last time that happened was arguably back in 1983 with Kevin Eastman's Ninja Turtles, and I want that kind of success and recognition for more independent comics and creators. There's a huge world of amazing creator-owned stories out there, and if those could even get a fraction of Invincible's popularity, that could expose those stories to a whole new generation of people. Now, a little bit of a definition first. When people say indie comic, what they usually mean is actually creator-owned comic. Basically, back in the 90s, a bunch of comic writers and artists were fed up with the big 2 companies not properly compensating creators, especially when it came to ownership and rights to the characters that they created. And so they spun off and founded Image Comics, which became one of the biggest symbols of creator-owned comics. And over time, other publishers like Dark Horse, Boom, and IDW also became major homes for comics outside of Marvel and DC. Those companies have since grown into giant corporations in their own right, some of which have a lot of the same problems as the big 2, but at the very least, the stories and the rights are fully within the hands of the creators. Indie comics are more than just finding the next big IP to adapt into a Netflix show, but instead, it's a place where artists and storytellers can flourish without the creative limitations that plague the rest of the industry. But if you're looking for something that's genuinely indie, check out Overkiller, written by Kent Trieu, illustrated by Kevin Tran, with colors by Ferrante, and letters by Kevin Loop. I met Kevin and Kent at WonderCon this year, and turns out they're fans of the channel, and the book is really cool. The first issue is like this really fun action romp that's very clearly inspired by Absolute Batman and Red Hood. There's also something really cool about these independent artist-driven comic prints. The colors are super bright, the paper is a really high quality. It's not something that I'm used to with the usual corporate printing methods with like the really thin, shitty paper, you know? If you want to check it out, I put a link for it as well as links to all the comics I talk about down in the description below. Most of them are affiliate links that help with the channel, but I would encourage you to try and support your local comic store if you have one around. The first book that I think deserves the Invincible treatment is Bone from 1991, written and illustrated by Jeff Smith. Bone is considered one of the best independent comics of all time, and it's a book that, like, growing up, I would constantly see in like every bookstore or comic store or library, but I couldn't tell you a goddamn thing about it. And now, after finally reading it, the best way I can describe it is if you mixed old school cartoons and newspaper strips with a sort of like Tolkien-esque high fantasy adventure. It follows the Bone cousins, Phone Bone, Phony Bone, and Smiley Bone, who are run out of their hometown and get lost in a vast valley filled with magic and monsters. And my favorite part of the book is how it blends this sort of like cartoonish humor with these very serious moments of fantasy and sometimes even horror. It seems like something that tonally wouldn't mesh well and would feel jarring, but Smith walks that line really well throughout the whole series. And I absolutely love the art style of the book. The characters are these super simple, almost like Mickey Mouse types that are super expressive and posable. But then you have these backgrounds and environments that are incredibly detailed, and that juxtaposition just makes them stand out even more as they explore this new world. And something like that could be really fun to adapt into animation, especially if you go back to the kind of classic type of like rubber hose cell animation that this is clearly inspired by. For nearly 20 years, there have been a ton of attempts to get this comic adapted in some way or another, and for whatever reason, they just keep on falling apart. Most recently with Netflix dropping it before production took off. It's almost become like a running joke at this point that Jeff Smith just cannot catch a break. But if an adaptation ever does get off the ground, a Bones series could really be something magical and showcase this story to a whole new generation of people. The next book is Kill or Be Killed from 2016, written by Ed Brubaker with art by Sean Phillips and colors by Elizabeth Brettweiser. The book follows Dylan, a depressed grad student who tries to take his own life, and as he's falling through the air, he immediately regrets it. He somehow, by a miracle, manages to survive, and he soon learns it wasn't an act of God that saved his life, but the exact opposite, a demon who demands a price. The catch is that now Dylan has to kill one person a month in order to stay alive. And so the rest of the book is him trying to target the people who he thinks deserve it while avoiding the police and the mob and keeping his sanity. Brubaker is one of the best writers out there when it comes to crime noir, like in his Daredevil run with Michael Lark, and this book does all that same stuff while also blending the supernatural and examining the ramifications that this kind of vigilante violence has, as well as covering some very serious and heavy topics about mental health. And it could be really similar to how Invincible addresses more mature ideas and themes than we're normally used to in a superhero show. I think this book was the first ever indie comic I actually picked up. I walked into my local comic store the week it came out, and the guy working there basically just took it off the shelf and told me to just buy it. And I am so grateful that he did, because this book fucking rips. And it's moments like that, the ability to discover new things that I otherwise would have never picked up, that makes those physical stores so special and a reason to keep supporting them whenever you can. The next book is Rogue Son from 2022, written by Ryan Parrott and illustrated by Abel with colors by Chris O'Halloran. The book follows Dylan Siegel, a teenager who discovers he's inherited the mystical armor of the superhero Rogue Son after the previous wearer, his estranged father, is murdered. This book is part of the new Image Comics Massive Verse, which is being spearheaded by Radiant Black by Kyle Higgins and Marcelo Costa, which I talked about in part 1 and is probably the closest thing to the next Invincible that we've seen in a while. So maybe there could be some fun crossover between a potential Radiant Black series and a Rogue Son, or any other potential Massive Verse show. But even outside the shared universe, Rogue Son specifically stands out on its own. If you know anything about me, you know I am a sucker for a legacy character storyline. Characters like Wally West and Miles Morales are some of my favorites because they have to live up to not only their predecessor and those expectations, but also to the ideals of the cultural icon that they've inherited. And Rogue Son takes that and flips a lot of it on its head. The original Rogue Son was a complicated person that Dylan honestly hated. Despite being a hero, his father made a lot of selfish and violent decisions, and so Dylan has to confront that moral ambiguity that is the Rogue Son mantle. I'm a big believer that superhero stories, when you boil them down to their bare essentials, are just some trashy soap operas just with people in tights. It's what made the Fantastic Four special, and Spider-Man, and the X-Men. It was basically Marvel's whole shtick for a while. In the family drama of Rogue Son, the core concept of Dylan having to inherit the mantle of the father he deeply resented, that fits that to a T. Also, if I had a nickel for every indie comic I talk about today about a guy named Dylan, I'd have 2 nickels, which is not a lot, but it's weird it happened twice. The next book I think deserves the Invincible treatment is The Good Asian from 2021, written by Pornsak Pachetcho with art by Alexandra Tefenki and colors by Lee Loffridge. The book follows Edison Hark, a Chinese-American detective in 1936 who gets pulled into a murder mystery in Chinatown, all while dealing with the kind of racism and xenophobia of that specific time frame, but also that still plagues us today. People assume all comic books are about superheroes, but really this kind of noir detective comic has such a historical footing within the industry, and this book uses that genre to tell not just a great detective story, but also something deeply human and emotionally raw. It talks very directly about identity and assimilation and class and what it means to even be a good minority in a country that still fundamentally does not see you as one of its own. Pornsak Pachetcho is one of those writers who's really good at taking genre stories and using them to make commentary about sort of the ugly, nasty truths about the world. He did that with Infidel, which followed a Muslim woman and her neighbors that live across the street from a house haunted by a demon that feeds off of xenophobia and hatred. And he does the same thing here too. And visually, the book is gorgeous. Alexandra Tefenki and Lee Loffridge absolutely nail that noir atmosphere here. It has all the shadows and smoke and the period detail you could ask for without feeling like it's a parody of that genre. Also, I have to mention it, Pachetcho's going to be writing for Absolute Green Arrow, releasing this May, with art by Raphael Albuquerque, so legally, I am required to tell you I'm going to be there day one. Because God, that book looks so fucking sick. The next book is East of West from 2013, written by Jonathan Hickman with art by Nick Dragotta and colors by Frank Martin. I originally assumed this book was just going to be your classic Western comic. And oh boy, was I wrong. The book is set in 2064 in an alternate version of America where the Civil War never officially ended. The country is split into 7 competing nations, and the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse manifest as part of an end of the world prophecy. And at the center of it is Death himself, who's basically going rogue and is trying to save his son. So yeah, not really like your regular Western, but boy, it goes hard. Jonathan Hickman is, above all else, a master of world building. The dude has been the architect behind so many of Marvel's biggest endeavors, characters, like the new Ultimate Universe or 2015 Secret Wars and the Krakoan Age of the X-Men, and East of West is no different. Every faction of this book has its own whole identity and ideology and visual language. There are all these fake historical documents and symbols and prophecies and just little details that make it feel like you're reading an actual history of a world. I always see like discourse about Hickman's data pages, which are basically these like spreads of information that he puts at the beginning of each issue. And I gotta go on record and say, I love a data page. I love that he does that. I don't read them. That's too many words. But I like that they're there. Technically, East of West is something that could work as like a prestige, sort of like Westworld HBO type of show, but I think doing it live action would be a disservice. If you do it live action, everything would have to be muted and realistic, and instead of the operatic and grand scale that makes the book feel mythic. Not to mention, Nick Dragotta's art is killer and gives the series such a visual identity. I first discovered him with Absolute Batman, and now I've been going back through his other work throughout his career, and he's quickly becoming one of my favorites in the industry. But just like any other Hickman book, it's not just lore and world building. There's a solid emotional core holding it together. It's about legacy and cycles of violence, not to mention the redefining of America and how those ideologies get co-opted by imperialists, which feels like it keeps getting more and more relevant, but you know, what do I know? In 2018, Amazon started developing it into a TV show with Hickman and Dragotta as executive producers, but then by the next year, it seems like it fell through. So maybe once we finish Invincible Season 10 and the 50th spin-off of The Boys, then they can give it another shot. The next book I want to see get the Invincible treatment is Assorted Crisis Events from 2025. Written by Dennis Camp with art by Eric Zawadzki and colors by Jordi Belair. All right, I'm gonna be for real with you all. Like this is just you and me here, okay? If you're interested in comics and you're looking for the next big indie book and then like the next big thing, and you're not reading Assorted Crisis Events, you're missing out. You're missing out. Assorted Crisis Events is an anthology series about people trying to go about their normal lives, all while reality itself is unraveling around them. Either temporal anomalies or space portals or other surreal assorted crisis events, which is where the name comes from. With an overarching mystery exploring what caused time to break and whether or not it can be fixed. Dennis Camp very, very quickly became my favorite writer in comics today, both with this book, but also with his work on 20th Century Men, The Ultimates, and Absolute Martian Manhunter, which are all outstanding. And Assorted Crisis Events is probably his best work. The idea that there are these cataclysmic universe-altering events happening all the time to just everyday people, and the only thing they can do about it is just power through and go to work the next day. It's very evocative of modern anxieties and how it feels to exist in today's world, where these terrifying, huge historical events are happening every single day, and it feels like we're powerless, and so all we can really do is just keep moving forward. This is one of those cases where a direct one-to-one adaptation would actually be a disservice to the original. The book uses the comic book medium to its absolute fullest. They even printed issue 8 on newsprint, and they added like an interactive element that can really only work in physical form. And that single issue completely sold out everywhere because the publisher wasn't expecting so much hype around it. Shout out to my buddy Ramon for scoring me a copy though. Everybody say thank you, Ramon. Comment thank you, Ramon down below, or else I won't make another fanboy pre-write ever again. Camp has been experimenting more and more with what's possible within the realm of comics and really pushing those boundaries, which not only makes for a great read, but also encourages people to buy single issues physically from local comic shops. But because of that, a lot of those ideas would get lost in a one-to-one translation. So instead, any potential adaptation would have to try new things and expand on the ideas instead of just adapting it beat for beat. And so Assorted Crisis Events could be kind of like a new Black Mirror or Love, Death, and Robots, where each episode is animated in a different style and does new things with the medium and the time manipulation premise. Seriously, if you take nothing else away from this video, get on Crisis Events. Just get on it. It's so good. The next book is kind of cheating a little bit because he's already had quite a few adaptations, but that's Hellboy. Written and illustrated by Mike Mignola with colors primarily by Dave Stewart. If you clicked on this video, chances are you already know who Hellboy is, because I put him in the thumbnail. But for those unaware, Hellboy is a demon who was summoned by the Nazis in the 1940s, recovered and raised in America, and now works for the Bureau of Paranormal Research and Defense, the BPRD, where he battles the supernatural. We of course got the original movies in the 2000s with Ron Perlman, directed by Guillermo del Toro, which are absolutely fantastic. I fucking love those things with all my heart. And then we got the 2018 movie, which that's all I have to say about that. In the most recent Crooked Man movie, which clearly had a limited budget, but it seems like they did the most with what they had. And so it feels kind of unfair to put this book on this list because he's already gotten such a big spotlight. But despite that, it feels like Hellboy's never really cracked that ceiling into the cultural icon that I think he should be, like Invincible. And so a series that takes the events of the comics directly and brings those to life with Mignola's creative direction, same as Robert Kirkman, including his incredible art style, could be the way to do that. The comic has kind of a unique structure to it. It's sort of like an anthology with a lot of one-off stories and shorts, but there's still an overall overall through line to follow about Hellboy resisting his origins, as well as some really great spin-off series that expand the world. Hellboy actually isn't a stranger to getting animated adaptations either. In 2006 and 2007, there were a pair of straight-to-DVD movies that were released, Sword of Storms and Blood and Iron. They got the same cast as the live-action movies for them, like Ron Perlman, Doug Jones, and Selma Blair, and they're a really fun time. But even then, Mignola's style specifically is so iconic and striking, especially for this series, with super harsh shadows and colors and character designs that only Mignola can really do right, that I'd love to see that specific style in motion. It's part of why that Web of Word game from a couple years ago was so cool, because they translated his style into 3D and it looked fucking awesome. Alright, now listen up. If your favorite part of Invincible is the gratuitous violence and watching people's guts spilling out, mostly Mark's, then I have a comic for you. The Luther Strode trilogy began in 2011 with The Strange Talents of Luther Strode, written by Justin Jordan, illustrated by Trad Moore, with colors by Philippe Sobrero, then followed up in 2012 with The Legend of Luther Strode, and then 2015 with The Legacy of Luther Strode. The story follows a guy named, and you're never gonna guess this, Luther Strode. He's a scrawny kid in high school who loves comics and video games, and he orders this old workout program called the Hercules Method to keep himself from getting beat up all the time. But instead of just getting jacked, it gives him insane superpowers. He then gets thrown headfirst into a world of secret cults and insanely superpowered freaks who can just rip people apart with their bare hands. And I'm gonna be upfront with you all. This book is straight up nasty. If excessive gore and body horror isn't for you, then this probably won't be your thing. Luckily for me though, I'm a freak and I love that kind of shit. It's super stylized, hyper violent with tons of body horror and gore. And it has that same sort of like holy shit energy that made Invincible stand out so much, you know, when we first saw Omni-Man paint the floor with the Guardians. In 2020, it was announced that Justin Jordan was writing the screenplay for a movie adaptation with himself and Trad Moore as producers. There haven't really been any updates since, but a potential trilogy of animated movies could be really fun and give this series a whole new audience. Like for real, the kills in this book are fucking sweet. Send this shit to James from Dead Meat, he'll love it. The next book is Descender from 2015 and its sequel book Ascender from 2019. Written by Jeff Lemire, art and colors by Dustin Wen, and letters by Steve Wan. Ascender is set in a sci-fi universe where a bunch of planet-sized robots called Harvesters suddenly appeared one day, wiped out huge chunks of civilization, and then disappeared just as fast. And as a result, the Galactic Council outlawed all forms of robots and artificial life. And years later, this little robot boy named Tim-21 wakes up and realizes he's one of the last robots in existence. He's the galaxy's most wanted, and he gets hunted down by a bunch of bounty hunters. It's a really sweet story about identity and personhood and what it means to be real, but also the ways that fear-mongering can lead to systemic oppression. Tim-21 is just this little robot kid caught in the middle of these wars and conspiracies and people projecting their own fears onto him. And then the sequel book, Ascender, takes all that sci-fi world building and it flips it on its head by jumping 10 years later where magic has basically replaced technology, which is a huge swing that basically reworks the entire book. I'll go on record and say that Jeff Lemire is one of the most underrated comic writers working today. Basically everything I've read of his has been fantastic, like his new 52 run on Green Arrow, Animal Man, and Sweet Tooth, and he teamed up with Justin Wen again for Robin and Batman in 2021, which is my favorite modern Batman comic. I talk about it all the time, and it just got a sequel focusing on Jason Todd. But I think a huge part of what makes these books so special is Dustin Wen's art. The watercolor style and the colors are absolutely gorgeous. It gives the whole book this like dreamy, almost storybook feel, and that makes it stand out from basically every other sci-fi comic out there. Wen has talked at length about some of the problems that plague the comics industry for artists, specifically with how Marvel and DC do things, and that just goes to show the importance of creator-owned comics and why something like Invincible matters so much. To put the stories and the IP back into the hands of their creators instead of faceless corporations. And the final book that I think deserves the Invincible treatment is Do a Powerbomb from 2022, written and illustrated by Daniel Warren Johnson with colors by Mike Spicer. The book follows Lona Steelrose, the daughter of a legendary wrestler who dies in an accident in the ring. Years later, Lona is trying to become a wrestler herself when she gets pulled into an interdimensional tournament by a necromancer, where the winner is allowed to bring one person back to life. But the problem is that on other planets, the wrestling isn't scripted. The fights are very much real and very much dangerous. So Lona has to team up with the man who killed her mother and fight to bring her back. If this sounds like it might be similar to Dragon Ball, it's because it is. Daniel Warren Johnson is one of the greats in the industry right now, like with his work on Transformers and Wonder Woman Dead Earth, or the Absolute Batman issue where Batman beats up a bunch of white supremacists, and Do a Powerbomb is easily one of his best. He has such a great command over action and movement with these super stylized poses and impacts. It feels like you're watching Sakuga animation from an anime, but just in still panels. Johnson's art style is so distinct and there's already so much motion that with the right care and budget in something like an animated movie, it could elevate it into something even more special. The opponents are these over-the-top wrestling caricatures like a pair of orangutans or a pizza party themed duo, but they each still have their own personal and sometimes tragic reason for competing in this tournament, because it's really the emotional story of this book that's the real gut punch. It's a devastating book about loss and grief and overcoming that with your family, wanting just one more chance with the people you love, and how hard you're willing to fight for that. It's the kind of thing that really makes you remember just how special comic books and art as a whole can really be. I think especially in an era where it feels like so much of the world has such little respect for artists and the work they create. You can't go 5 fucking seconds without seeing some stupid AI shit, and we're constantly at the will of giant faceless corporations who determine every moment of our lives. It's now more important than ever to show up and support independent comics whenever we can. And that's why it's been so refreshing to see a creator-owned comic like Invincible become this huge global sensation. Even if the show has its fair share of problems, the fact that it's become a household name is reason enough to get excited. Not just as a reader and someone who loves comic books, but someone who wants to make them one day, someone who wants to create shit of my own one day. It's inspiring to see something actually break through in such a massive way like this, that anybody can have an idea, put a pen to paper, create something that's meaningful to them, and maybe, just maybe, that could become the next Invincible. And speaking of, let's see how those Invincible fans are doing. All right, you know what? Maybe not. Maybe let's just scrap this whole thing, actually. But what are some indie comics that you'd like to see get the Invincible treatment? What do you think about Invincible as a whole? Thanks again to CyberGhost VPN for sponsoring this video. Don't forget to click the link down in the description to grab your special 84% off discount. If you like this video, be sure to like button and subscribe. Special thanks to Eze Santantone 8482, Bane Hasty, and Tarfy for joining the spectacular tier of my Patreon and channel members. If you want to support the channel for just $1 a month, you get access to all my videos early, and for $3 or more, you get access to exclusive videos once a month. This is Tory Boy 17 coming at you live. We can be bees and we can be responsible, and I will see you around.